Challenger Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has won the election to become Brazil's next president by a whisker, defeating incumbent Jair Bolsonaro after a bitterly fought campaign. According to the country's election authority, Lula secured 50.8% of the vote compared with 49.2% for Bolsonaro on Sunday. First of all, I'd like to thank all the comrades that are here with me. We had a fight with the machine of the state, not just a candidate, who tried to block us from winning this election. For everyone who went to vote, I want to thank you, Lula, 77, told a cheering crowd of supporters. Bolsonaro had been leading throughout the first half of the vote count, but as soon as Lula overtook him, the streets of São Paulo's city center were filled with the sound of cars honking their horns. People in the streets of Rio de Janeiro's Ipanema neighborhood could be heard shouting, "It turned. He's the best for the poor, especially in the countryside," said retired government worker Luis Carlos Gomes, 65, who hails from Maranhão state in the poor northeast region. "We were always starving before him." It was Brazil's most polarizing election since its return to democracy in 1985 after a military dictatorship that Lula, a former union leader, has rallied against, and Bolsonaro, a former army captain, invokes with nostalgia. It remained to be seen whether 67-year-old Bolsonaro will concede defeat. It is tradition in Brazil for the losing candidate to speak first and accept the election loss, before the new president addresses the nation. Most opinion polls before the election gave Lula the lead, but the race had become increasingly tight in recent weeks. Guilherme Casseros, from the Brazilian Center for International Relations, said the atmosphere in São Paulo felt like it did when Lula was first elected in 2002. It was more an election of hope back then. Now, I have the feeling that many people are celebrating the end of a very dark period. I think everyone knows it's an uphill battle, but I think people are very excited to see what Lula will do, Casseros told Al Jazeera. The election served as a referendum on two starkly different, and vehemently opposed, visions for Brazil's future. Bolsonaro promised to consolidate a sharp rightward turn in Brazilian politics after a presidency that witnessed one of the world's deadliest outbreaks of COVID-19 and widespread deforestation in the Amazon basin. Lula promised more social and environmental responsibility, recalling the rising prosperity of his 2003 to 2010 presidency before corruption scandals tarnished his Workers' Party. Oliver Stunkel, a professor of international relations, said Lula will need to work hard on reconciliation given the stark divide. Basically 50% of Brazilians are very afraid his return to power. "This is a very polarized country, it's a frustrated country, it's a more poorer country. A lot of people may question the legitimacy of this election. I think it's a volatile moment now, and Lula will have to choose his words very carefully." Stunkel, from the Fundação Getúlio Vargas, FGV, in São Paulo, told Al Jazeera. Roadblocks on election. Lula allies on Sunday said police had stopped buses carrying voters on highways even though the electoral authority had prohibited them from doing so. Brazilian media reported such operations were concentrated in the northeast, where Lula has the strongest support. "What happened today is criminal. There is no justification for the police to mount roadblocks on election day," Workers' Party President Gleisi Hoffmann told journalists. However, the Superior Electoral Court, SE, which runs Brazil's elections, said no one had been prevented from voting and declined to extend voting hours. The Federal Highway Police said they had complied with court orders. Bolsonaro's 4 years in office were marked by proclaimed conservatism and defense of traditional Christian values. He claimed his rival's return to power would usher in communism, legalized drugs, abortion and the persecution of churches, things that did not happen during Lula's earlier 8 years in office. Thomas Trauman, an independent political analyst, compared the election results with U.S. President Joe Biden's 2020 victory, noting Brazil's divisions. "The huge challenge that Lula has will be to pacify the country," said Trauman. "People are not only polarized on political matters, but also have different values, identity and opinions. What's more, they don't care what the other side's values, identities and opinions are." Lula is credited with building an extensive social welfare program during his previous period in office, helping lift tens of millions into the middle class, as well as presiding over an economic boom. He left office with an approval rating above 80%, but he is also remembered for his administration's involvement in vast corruption revealed by sprawling investigations. Da Silva's arrest in 2018 kept him out of that year's race against Bolsonaro, a fringe legislator at the time.